G'day all. In relation to something I said in the introduction video, I'm going to talk a little bit about curriculum and syllabus and planning to teach this week. And then we'll dive into detail in the Queensland syllabus documents next week. But this is by way of grounding. It's by way of making you ready to teach nationally and internationally as well as in Queensland, and having that kind of deeper level of knowledge. So when I'm talking about the idea of curriculum and syllabus, what the words mean, how they're used, and why we do the things we do with curricula and syllabuses. So this is my particular usage of the term. It is fairly consistent internationally, but people use them in different ways. So I think in America, they tend to use curriculum as something that you buy off a shelf from a company. So they will introduce a new curriculum and it will be a product. In Australia, historically, syllabus meant the government handed down a document that told teachers what must be taught. And we have that. So we have the Australian curriculum, which to me is a wrong use of the term. It's really the Australian syllabus. But the Australian curriculum is what teaches us, or what tells us what we should teach in foundation year. So that's pre-primary, prep, the year before year 1, all the way through to year 10. And then we have the state syllabuses that are for year 11 and 12. That's how we currently run in Queensland. The notion was that there would be national agreed syllabuses for all of schooling, but it hasn't gone that way. There is a national framework from ACARA, the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. I don't know whether it's authority or agency, but that's what most of the acronym means. ACARA creates the Australian curriculum, which is the one from foundation to 10, and it has a framework for senior subjects, but the states produce their own. So Queensland has just created new syllabus documents for senior secondary. So that's how I use it. That's a syllabus. A curriculum, to me, and again, within the literature as well, this is not just my personal, private, idiosyncratic version. The curriculum is what teachers make. The curriculum is what teachers make individually and collaboratively. It's planning to teach in the school. And I'm going to go through some definitions of what curriculum is in a minute. But to me, this distinction is helpful. The syllabus is what the government mandates and says, this is the framework, this is what you must teach, this is how we're going to assess it, and so on. The curriculum is something that teachers actively make. You don't just teach the syllabus. You don't just get the syllabus document off the website and start at page 1 and teach through. It makes no sense. You're making professional decisions about what learning activities, what sequence, what assessment, etc., etc. You've got less freedom and autonomy to do that under the new Queensland senior syllabuses than you had under the old ones, and we'll talk about that next week. I'll rant a little bit about teacher autonomy versus quality, and there's a whole bunch of stuff we can talk about with that, but let's leave that on the side of our plate till next week and just talk about curriculum and syllabuses more broadly. Correct grammar, it really bugs me. So what's going on there in my brain? It really annoys me when people use these things incorrectly. Curriculum is the singular, curricula is the plural, and curricular is the adjective. So in a sentence, this curriculum, singular, in fact, all of these curricula, plural, have many common curricula, adjective, features. The adjective curricula qualifies the features in the sentence. So does that make sense? Because people tend to use curricula when they mean curricular and curriculum when they mean curricula and so on. So hopefully that's one that you'll get right. And the other one is criterion and criteria. Criterion is singular, criteria are plural. So don't say criteria 1, criteria 2. It's the criterion, the criteria are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, criterion 1, criterion 2, etc. Might be obvious, but it makes you sound more professional to teachers, to superiors, to supervisors in the school, like heads of department, deputy principals, and to parents. And parents will grumble about your grammar, so you might as well get it right. So there are a number of different definitions of curriculum. These are drawn from the relevant literature, and they show that the term is not simple and uncontested, that it's complicated. So curriculum can be defined as that which is taught, the thing that the teacher delivers to the students, or a set of subjects. So the curriculum is chemistry, physics, biology, maths, science. What? That's a very sciencey list. English, HPE, visual arts, business. I need to think of a few more. Music, psychology, food and nutrition, legal studies. That's one way of thinking about it. The curriculum is just the subjects together. Curriculum as content is a common metaphor. Curriculum as a program of studies, a planned set of learning experiences. Curriculum as materials, that was that American definition that I talked about before, that a curriculum is something you can take down off the shelf and go, this is the curriculum. Sequence of courses, so the curriculum of a whole degree program, for example, is this master's is made up of 16 individual courses that are sequenced in a particular order in a particular direction for strong reasons about when we can get placements in schools, but also you need to know this before you know that, and so on. Performance objectives, so curriculum as not what the teacher delivers, not what the student experiences, but what you hope that the student will be able to demonstrate at the end of the studies. So that's a way of thinking about it as well. You can see how these things differ. So that which is taught is what the teacher delivers. Most of these in some way are teacher-centered, but performance objectives are set by the teacher, but for the student to actually demonstrate. Course of study, there's a bunch, but here are some kind of richer definitions rather than just one-liners. So everything that goes on within the school, including out-of-class activities, guidance, interpersonal relationships. So that's incredibly broad. That's not just the written down planned curriculum that the teachers created. That's also Monday morning assembly, going in lines, standing for the national anthem. Those are things that the students are learning as well. Rules for classroom behavior, expectations, whether there's a teacher on classroom duty, playground duty, whether that teacher wanders around, whether they talk to the students. There's a bunch of things that students are learning that aren't written down anywhere. They're part of learning in the classroom. Or a narrower definition, slightly narrower, everything that's planned by school personnel. So the random stuff, the bullying and so on that happens, the things that happen without being planned, the accidents, part of the first definition, but not part of the second definition of curriculum. Or a series of experiences undergone by learners in the school. So that takes it away from, this is the written down plan the teachers have, to this is what actually happens to learners. Students, this is what experiences they undergo in school, or what a learner experiences as a result of schooling. So that's broader than in school. That includes homework, for example. That includes reading, that includes excursions, that includes a whole variety of things that an individual goes through because they're at school. That might now include cyberbullying, or on the other hand, ongoing friendships. It might include school sport on the weekends. There's a whole variety of things that the student experiences because they're at school. William Schubert has a really nice set of images of curriculum, which again, he's drawn from literature. And again, they're quite contrasty. They're not, it's quite hard to find a particular individual simple definition. I hope that you will create your own definition, but that it will be rich. Now you'll choose some of these, you won't be able to choose all of them, but choose some of these that make sense to you, and then kind of weave your own definition out of them. If you're writing notes during this, which I would encourage you to be doing, try just writing down your definition of curriculum at the end of these couple of slides about the ways in which we think about curriculum. And try and write down your own personal definition. Stop the video, try thinking it through for yourself, applying it for yourself. So curriculum is content or subject matter, we talked about on the previous slide, or planned activities. So content for delivery or what happens to students. Curriculum as learning outcomes is similar to the learning objectives one. So these are the ones that Schubert's come up with. Curriculum is cultural reproduction. That is, what are the best features of our culture and how do we pass them on? This is one of the things that schooling is intended to do. And other kinds of education as well. So an apprenticeship, which is a much older form of education. A blacksmith in the village as a child would go and work alongside the blacksmith and reproduce that culture and that set of skills, that craft knowledge about how hot the metal has to be hammered and so on. So part of the role of schooling is to reproduce the good features of our culture, to find the things that have worked, that are valuable, that enhance human life, and pass those on to the next generation. So that's part of the role of curriculum. But the discrete tasks and concepts is kind of out of order. His order is a bit odd, but I've adopted his order. But this is the counterpoint to D. So D is cultural reproduction, taking the good parts of our society and passing them on. F is curriculum as an agenda for social reconstruction. In other words, what are the bad parts of our society and how do we challenge them? So things like safe schools, for example, trying to figure out ways to stop kids being bullied. Safe schools focused on their sexuality particularly, but it was basically a general anti-bullying program. How do we change the bits of our society that are excluding people, damaging people, bullying, harmful, and so on? How do we build a better society in future? And school has a role doing that as well. You can see these two things are in tension. There is the essentially conservative activity of cultural reproduction, conserving what's best about our society. And there's the essentially progressive activity of social reconstruction. And some schools will emphasize one more than the other, and you can probably kind of list and think about the names of the schools that would do those things. But every school is doing both of these things to some varying proportion. So figuring out how to, as I say, keep the good bits and fix the bad bits of our society is one of the things that is a role of schooling. And finally, curriculum as curare, which is, I believe, a Latin word, the interpretation of lived experience. Now, John Dewey talked quite a bit about this. Dewey wrote stuff about progressive education over 100 years ago that we still are not anywhere near actually implementing, but it's amazing. So checking out Dewey is well worthwhile. But the notion that you're not in schools preparing students for life, but that you're actually engaging in life with them and helping them to experience it and interpret it, to come to understand the world in rich ways, to actually think about, reconceptualize, reframe their experience in ways that help them to understand it better. So that is quite a progressive notion of what a curriculum can do. But Dewey talked about learning by doing. So not just doing an artificial activity in the classroom, but going out and actually doing things like service learning. How do we go out into our community and actually serve our community by improving something or learning about something and creating local knowledge, or interviewing old people about their experience of the community and creating an archive of that, or ways where students are actually doing real stuff, not just fake stuff that's a rehearsal to do real stuff later, if that makes sense. So the hidden curriculum, I talked about bullying a bit before, but there's also a whole bunch of stuff about things like test wiseness. So I try not to fall for this, but in multiple choice tests, for example, the longest answer is quite often correct because the person will put less time into writing the distractors, the incorrect answers, than the correct answer. So that's a piece of test wiseness that students can learn. And if you don't know the answer, ideally you know the answer. If you don't know the answer, picking the longest one can work. But be warned, that won't work in this course because I'm aware of this piece of test wiseness as well. Teamwork, collaboration, working as a team, the ability to behave in certain ways, to meet expectations, and not just teacher expectations, fellow student expectations. Things around fashion and so on is part of what students learn in school. Things about that. I have a number of different friends who have homeschooled their kids, and the socialization of kids who are homeschooled is different. Different parents attend to that in different ways by putting them in scouts or other kind of activities where they're socialized with other kids even if they're not at school. But there's a lot of socialization that goes on at school that develops people's ability to be with other people and do those kind of things. There are often implicit codes. There are ways of behaving, ways of acting and so on that can be made explicit. And if they're not made explicit, often that will actually perpetuate advantage. Because if you come from a wealthy household where your parents know these codes and ways of behaving. They've been well educated. They have a university education. They work in business. They know these codes of how to actually communicate so that people will treat you with respect in society. If your parents are not in that situation, if your parents are long-term unemployed, relatively low levels of education, they can be the best people in the world. They can be the most loving parents, but they may not know some of those codes of social acceptance, or they may even disdain some of those codes of social acceptance in ways that might make you struggle to be employed, for example. Now, school can help to redress some of that imbalance. School can help to make the invisible visible and to make those codes visible. But the hidden curriculum is all of this stuff that happens. It's that element of things that happen to the student because they're in school that nobody plans but that do happen anyway and that are real. And there can be positive and negative hidden curriculum. Students can learn respect, courtesy, honor, courage at school, as well as be bullied and experience bad stuff. So the hidden curriculum is something to be thinking about as a teacher. What am I communicating as a teacher that I hadn't reflected on, that I hadn't written down anywhere, but that I'm communicating? How do I engage with students in a way? How do I make my classroom a safe environment for all students, and so on? How do I have challenge in my classroom for all students, push them beyond where they are? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. Curriculum development, I've said, is ideally a collaborative process. So the notion of teachers privately toiling away, creating their own curriculum for their own class and then teaching it in their own class with the door shut and nobody knowing about it, yeah, are kind of over. You tend to teach in a department in large secondary schools particularly, which is the place you're likely to be if you're teaching senior secondary science. You will often be in a department, you will either have other colleagues teaching the same subject or adjacent subjects. So you'll typically be working with a HOD, you'll typically be working with colleagues around development. It's based on the syllabus, but not dictated by the syllabus. The syllabus mandates what you have to teach, but not exactly when and how. You have some freedom. You should embrace your freedom. You should not slavishly follow the syllabus. You should create a curriculum that's for your students, your teaching style, your context. Don't reinvent the wheel. Adopt and adapt. Steal from the best. Find other people's great resources and adapt them for your circumstances. Get the stuff that other people have done, and try and be a good corporate citizen by leaving stuff behind you as well. I've taught in a number of schools. My daughter Cassie, who's a physics teacher, has taught in a number of schools, and you'll turn up to the school and there'll be just nothing. You're starting from scratch. Well, that's, to my mind, poor corporate citizenship, or poor citizenship in general, on the part of the person who left that you're replacing, because they ought to have left you their resources. If they did, you don't just teach slavishly off them, you adapt them for yourself, but you're starting from something rather than starting from nothing. So keep your materials and keep them in such a way that you can take a copy away with you because you might want it for your next school, but you can leave a copy in the school as well for the person who succeeds you so that they're not starting from scratch. Use your freedom, embrace your freedom. I said that already. You've got more freedom than you often think you have. You sometimes feel very constrained, and we are in many ways very constrained as teachers, but we have more freedom than we assume we do. It's that thing of it's easier to ask forgiveness than get permission. Do something, try something, and if it doesn't quite work, you can ask forgiveness. But having said that, also, you need to be a bit of a bush lawyer. Read the syllabus document yourself. Don't just assume what other people say, because if you know chapter and verse, you then have more freedom, because you can say, hang on, no, you're assuming that it says I can only do this, but in fact, I have the freedom to do this plus plus. That makes sense. And then curriculum development is an ongoing adaptive process. You don't write your curriculum, your work plan for the year, whatever that document is, and then leave it for the next 15 years. Each year, each class is different, the circumstances are different, the world has changed, you've learned more. So you'll continue to adapt it both during the year, so tweaking bits and pieces as you go along, and then from year to year for the next class as well. So it's an ongoing adaptive process. It's never finished. Will Anderson, the Australian stand-up comedian, says one of the things he loves about it, and he's been doing it for 25 years or so, is that you can get better at it, but you can never master it. You can never be perfect at comedy because every audience is different. Every night is different. Where the people have come from in their day is different. You're different every day. So, and teaching is like that. It's like stand-up comedy. You can get better and better at it, but you can never master it. There's always more to go. And that's, it could make you depressed, but it actually, I find it incredibly exciting that there's always more to learn, more to know, more to go. I suggest planning as far as possible in terms of student activities. So don't say, this is the content I'm going to teach today. It's what will the students do? Because if you actually write, well, one of the reasons to do this is because if you actually write down, the students will shut up and listen to me for 40 minutes, then probably that's not ideal. And by having written it down in terms of student activities, you might go, okay, the students have been sitting for 20 minutes, I'll get them to do something now. So it reminds you to keep changing up the student activities, to have a sense of forward momentum so that the lesson doesn't just meander and wander and get wasted away. But it also means you're actively attending to what do students need to do in order to learn this content, and what can they actively do so that their brains are actively engaged. I'll talk a bit more about constructivism later and students' active engagement in learning. Active doesn't mean physically active with your hands, it means mentally active with your brain. So what am I doing to activate their brains? Is it just a straight up content dump information flow, or is there something that's actively engaging them and making them work with the knowledge? Because that's what makes it go in and stay in and be helpful. When you're writing a unit, I would suggest, okay, so lowercase unit and uppercase unit. A unit to me is a small chunk of knowledge that has the same topic. So a big U unit is that in the new senior secondary syllabuses, there are 4 units across potentially 2 years. So unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4. And that's the same for all of the senior sciences. There are those 4 units. Some schools are actually teaching them across 1 year, which seems nuts to me. It's incredibly, with more classes per week, but it seems incredibly intense to me. Across 2 years is already pretty intense. But those big U units are for 6 months. And 6 months is not one topic. One topic might be 4 to 6 weeks, some shorter, some longer. So a lowercase u unit is that. It's one topic that you plan and design. It forms part of the big U unit, which is 1 semester, effectively, half a year, which forms the course, which is the whole 2 years, unit 1 to 4. And then the assessment that relates to that. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail next week. So a unit, a small U unit, should have a story arc. There should be a beginning, a middle, and end. The idea of a story in a novel, you read the first sentence and it hooks you in, setting up an expectation. What's this story about? This story is about, Dickens starts off, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The story hooks you in with expectations. There is some kind of conflict usually, a murder mystery to be solved, a romance to be romanced, etc., etc. There's some kind of arc to the story. There's some beginning that sets up expectations. The meet cute, the attractive boy and the attractive girl, or any other combinations that might actually get together, see each other, are attracted to each other, sets up expectations that they'll get together, but the middle, there's complications. So this is, the pet hate of rom-coms and the obvious rom-com is there's a misunderstanding and someone doesn't understand what somebody else meant by something or whatever. So there's a complication in the middle, and at the end it gets resolved and they get married and live happily ever after. Murder mystery, there is a body at the beginning, there is a potential suspect, but then you discover in the middle that that suspect has an alibi and that there's potentially another piece of evidence. And by the end, you know who was the killer and they've been brought to justice, right? So that's what a story is, essentially. Set up expectations, complications, solution. That's what a unit should be like. Set up expectations on the part of the students. So not just, blah, we did that and now it's time to do this and then we do the next thing and the next thing. That's tedious. We students are going to learn to understand more about the world in this way, around this topic. So we're going to understand a little bit more about how aquatic organisms adapt to life in situations where they are near borders between fresh and salt water, for example. So set that up with some kind of engaging activity, complicate, add detail, and then there's some kind of resolution, there's some kind of ending. It's clear to the students at the end what they've learned and how they've learned it. So I hope that makes sense as a concept. It's a concept that helps me at least, that you're writing the unit, that there is an arc to it. It's not just one damn thing after another, if that makes sense. Different kinds of people think in different kinds of ways. This is one of the things that we learn as teachers, and it's easy to not know that, to project our own way of thinking and assume that everybody else thinks like us. But I've been married for almost 32 years, and I know damn well that she doesn't think like I think, and our kids don't think like I think. We all think differently. And our students think differently, and there are different ways, there are different broad ways in which people think. Some people are much more visual and think in visual images. Some people think in words, kind of see their inner dialogue in words. Some people think in music. I have kind of musical free association syndrome where I'll hear a sentence and it will just remind me of a song from 30 years ago or whatever. That's one of the ways my brain works that not everyone's brain works. One of the ways in which people's brains work differently is sequential and global thinkers. There seems to be some kind of gender difference on this, but that's a stereotype, and like all stereotypes, it's flawed. There are typically, boys are happy to be sequential learners. Typically, at secondary particularly, boys will be quite happy to just take this bit and then this bit and then the next bit and then the next bit and just kind of take it in that form. And that was kind of what old curriculum used to do, was quite sort of bitty and chunky. Girls can tend to, or I should just be talking about sequential and global thinkers. Global thinkers, but there seems to be some correlation with girls, want to have the big picture and then fit the little bits into the big picture. So it's a slightly different way of thinking. They want to understand the big picture. So a sequential thinker will be happy to pick up little bits and put them together later. A global thinker wants to have the big picture and then put the little bits into it. What that means is that a global thinker will sometimes go, I don't understand any of this. None of this makes sense to me. It's all nonsense. Because they don't feel like they've got the big picture. And then once you kind of get them to the big picture, help explain, suddenly they'll be like, oh, it all makes sense now because the structure of the thoughts is important to them. Whereas a sequential thinker, it'll be like, I understand this bit, I don't understand this bit, I understand this bit, this bit. Can you understand the difference there? So sometimes if you're a sequential thinker yourself, you might struggle to work with global thinkers and vice versa. So it's about getting outside your own brain a bit and trying to listen and understand what that student is and what they need. So it's a way of thinking. David Ausubel talked about advanced organizers. An advanced organizer, and please, another grammar thing, don't write advanced organizer. It's not advanced in the sense that it's futuristic. It's an advanced organizer because it organizes the knowledge in advance. It's that globe. So an advanced organizer is an idea that Ausubel came up with, which is that you give students something that's a structure and then fit the knowledge into it rather than giving it in bitty terms. Because that will help the global thinkers and it won't harm the sequential thinkers. The sequential thinkers won't care about it much, but it won't hurt them and it will help the global thinkers. So using advanced organizers, that you hate it when you say not do something and then do it, using advanced organizers is one great way to address this particular issue. Curriculum used to be private, as I alluded to before. The teacher created it, kept it, owned it. The students just did as they were told and nobody else saw it. It's now very public. You will be sharing documents with Ed Queensland if you work in a state school, with your head of departments and principals and other people. You'll be sharing documents with students and parents and so on. So curriculum, work planning information is public these days and used to be private. So being able to do that, getting that out there, I think is important and valuable. And I think it's a good move to make it more public, but it raises the pressure on little things like grammar and on big things like being able to defend your sequence of learning. All right, that's probably gone longer than I intended it to, but I hope it's helpful because, as I say, I really want you to be thinking, growing as a professional thinker who has a broad basis of information on which to base the judgments you make as a teacher. Thanks a lot. See ya.